I was born with gynecomastia, normally walk with a little bit higher estrogen.
So why didn't you just not approve the drug? Or why didn't you just stop the trial?
We're talking about a breast cancer drug, a fertility drug. Do you think that's a good idea for a man to run some of these long-term?
There is a thought in long-term living, if your levels are too low, longevity isn't good either.
What do you consider a microdose or a normal dose? Because it's so all over the place.
It can cause a bit of anxiety for some patients listening. I've tried lowering my dose. I've got a low body fat.
Unfair, and I know some brilliant bodybuilders, but a lot of them really don't care about much other than how big can we get, how fast can we do it, how can we look what we assume is our best looking, with no thought of long-term or repercussions whatsoever.
So we're here today with Dylan Gemelli. Dylan is has a number one podcast in, I believe, health and fitness in the USA, and really happy to have him here with us in the UK through video. And we want to talk to him about what all things health and fitness. We can't talk about all of them. We've got limited time, but we're gonna start with I think the big one, which we're known for on this channel, is testosterone replacement therapy. And what Dylan's thoughts are. So often, I know, Dylan, you on your channel, you started talking about, anabolic steroids and telling people you weren't putting up with the nonsense and telling people what's healthy, what's not healthy, and looking at more of the long term. But so often, especially in the UK, people tend to conflate, and they shouldn't, but they do this, conflate normal testosterone therapy, testosterone replacement with anabolic steroids and abuse. And it's just so frustrating in this field. I know we've been on a round table panel together and we've shared some thoughts. So I know we just have a nice conversation. I see what your thoughts are about this topic.
I mean, it's frustrating. Like, you go down the line of things that get said. One of the things that really bothers me is when people call it cheating. And so I'm going to shift from the normal discussion, which is always about, is it using steroids? Is it cycling? Is it dangerous? We'll get to all of that, but let's talk about the cheating aspect, because my argument back is very simple. It's very direct, and it's not something really debatable. How is it cheating if you are not healthy, if you're simply putting yourself in the state that you're supposed to be at? So you know this, and your channel, probably everybody watching does. If you have a hypogonadal condition, you're suffering in multitudes of ways, correct? You are feeling down, you're having trouble focusing, you have a low libido, you have an inability to gain muscle, you're going to probably be holding on to fat, unable to lose fat. This list is long. So if you take TRT and get yourself to the normal, healthy state that you are supposed to be at, how is that cheating? Does that just not put you on an equal playing field now to where everybody else is, because you're obviously deficient and you're actually the one that's being cheated? So that's my first argument to people that come with that is, no, we're just making it even now.
Though some will say, well, what's a TRT dose? And that always, but again, as it depends on the individual. For one person, if they're doing, 150 milligrams and 200 milligrams a week, it might seem like a performance enhancing dose. And for other people, that's what's required. And I think a lot of people don't realize the nuance behind testosterone, and how it works in the individual. It's about your receptor site sensitivity. It's about your SHBG levels. There's so many facets to it than just having a number. But I guess in the world of maybe social media or society in general, people are like, they always want to blame someone else for why they're not where they want to be. But what was the second reason you were starting to?
Well, and just to reiterate on that, everybody's different, like you said. So what is healthy that puts somebody in the right state of health for one is quite different than the other. Because, you've seen guys that are 400 and 500 that feel great. And I mean, it's kind of shocking to me, but then you've got guys that are in that range that feel it's not good enough for them. Now, I would say on average, when you start getting maybe 1,200, 1,300, you might be at a little bit of an advantage then for some. Some people, once you get past 1,500, that may be the magic number where it's like, okay, now you're cycling essentially and you're running too much, too high for most. I don't find it necessary to walk around with levels over 1,000 unless you are just like severely suffering. But then again, this is all kind of just different from person to person. But for the most part, I like, I feel like 7, 8, 900 are real nice, healthy ranges, and that's a equal playing field. But, the other things like you've talked about, one of the things that does bother me is that everybody just wants to get on it now without understanding there's a need and then there's not a need. And I, Mike, at this point, comments and stuff, I don't respond to them. They don't affect me one way or another, but I do like to see the discussion. Sift through the negativity and look for the key points on what's bothering people, what are their questions, and what are they being told that's bad. And one of the things that I've seen lately when I was doing some reaction videos was this really bad amount of information that people are saying, oh, you'll bounce back, you can use it and come off of it and get on it and come off of it and you'll just bounce right back. And that is just not true.
It's not true.
It's just not true. And, the longer you're on it, the older you are, the far more difficult it is to bounce back, to recover. And I, for one, I don't know your thoughts because we haven't discussed this in private, but I'm not a big fan of using Clomid and Novadex and enclomiphene that, to do that, to jumpstart. I mean, we're talking about, and this is just, if you say this out loud, we're talking about a breast cancer drug, a fertility drug, and you find that these are, do you think that's a good idea for a man to run some of these long term?
I was just long term, that's the key. So we know in some of the guidance for the British Society of Sexual Medicine and some of the other sexual medicine guidance for young men that want to maintain fertility and have low levels of testosterone, many times they're put on Clomid or even enclomiphene as an alternative because it may have less side effects than the Clomid. But you're right. I had this conversation with someone earlier, actually, before we had this, about these aren't, your body makes testosterone, your body doesn't make clomiphene or enclomiphene. These are small molecules that aren't native to your body. I get why people want to maintain the pituitary axis so that they're in full control under their own steam. And when you take off that Clomid or enclomiphene, your body will just continue making it until it slows it down again for whatever reason was causing the slowdown. But there are side effects potentially with all of them. I think more with the Clomid than the enclomiphene, but even still, and enclomiphene's all over TikTok and everywhere. And it was, nearly brought to market. I think it may have even been brought to the market in India. But it never made it over the threshold because I think some of the regulators had a very bizarre sense of what it can do. I think they said, well, of course it can raise the levels to a substantial amount, especially in the patients that were in the study. They were diabetic and they were obese. They were selected to be diabetic and obese, and the hope was then this would help their diabetes by raising their testosterone levels. But at the end of the day, they didn't approve it. They say, yeah, we know Clomid could raise the levels. That we want to see functional outcomes. I'm like, okay. But people have to understand the history of that for both in the US, the regulator, and the EU was coming off the back of, remember, the cholesterol studies for HDL. So people were thinking in the early noughties, if you raise HDL, then you'll reverse heart disease. It was an assumption. And so they came up with a drug, I think Pfizer did, called torcetrib, and it was jacking up everyone's HDL, but people in the study were dying of like stroke, and it was actually not having a positive functional outcome. And so in the past, they had got close to approving these drugs based on just increasing a number, but then they got extra cautious and stopped doing that. My argument was, well, why didn't you just not approve the drug? Or why didn't you just stop the trial? And because some things like testosterone, what are you looking for? Can I raise the testosterone level? And then with that, secondary is, can I improve the symptoms of the patient afterwards? But some of the things they're looking at were like grip strength. There's if your testosterone's increased, your grip strength's going to be increased. And I don't think that was the best way to do it. So anyway, they didn't have enough data, and they didn't have enough money to go into another phase 3 trial, and so they ended up not bringing it to market. But it didn't mean the drug wasn't safe, especially in the cohort of men that had diabetes, already high risk, and obese and overweight. But to your answers, the long-term effective benefit, I don't think we have enough data to know long-term continuing with those molecules And the fact that it is a fertility drug, it is approved for women in fertility, the Clomid is. But yeah, the Nolvadex, I never think that's a good idea because it lowers your IGF-1, right?
I'm not a fan. Yeah.
Yeah. What's your take on, speaking of IGF-1, we're going to do a little shift. Some will argue that for the longevity side of things, that you don't want to have a high IGF-1 in some of the studies. I don't know if you've come across that at all, or others who, you've come from more of the bodybuilding world where, and even the peptide world, people are injecting LR3 IGF-1 and or IGF-1 of some source and claiming it has some beneficial effects.
That's one of those ones. Okay, so I've never been a fan of using it myself, and I've always cautioned against it. Now, there's benefit there. There's 100% benefit there, and obviously, or people wouldn't want to use it. But I've always felt like there's better ways to go about this. And, when I start to see stuff, here's what I do. I always weigh risk versus reward, and especially when it comes to compounds and things that we're using. And with that particular compound, when I'm looking at it, there's some nice benefit, but I find that there's just as much risk. And I think there's way better ways or things that we could use that could be just as beneficial, if not more, with basically no side effects whatsoever.
Were you referring to the tesamorelins, or are you referring to the...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think, and it's funny you said that, because that's literally my number one favorite peptide in terms of the growth hormone ones and the ones that can actually have muscle benefit with the fat loss benefit. It's like number 2 or 3 on my all-time favorites. But yes, tesamorelin, ipamorelin, CJC 1295, these are so much safer, and they do the trick. You know how it is, Mike, and I have been around this far too long, is that a lot of bodybuilders, and I'm not saying all because that's unfair, and I know some brilliant bodybuilders, but a lot of them really don't care about much other than how big can we get, how fast can we do it, how can we look what we assume is our best looking, with no thought of long-term or repercussions whatsoever. They don't look into or think about anything.
No,
my concern is, how can we look our best, feel our best, and live the longest? Because I'll go back in time and I'll pull pictures and I'll tell you, this is when I looked my best. And then this is when I also felt my worst. So what's the point? What good is it? You can't maintain it and you feel horrible.
Yeah, just for a photo shoot, you get that. Well, interesting. The tesamorelin, or Egrifta, as it's approved in the USA, and I think there's a new version, and one's gone off patent. Again, they try to bring it into the EU, and the head of the European approvals said, "Well, we can't approve this because IGF-1 is dangerous, and this raises the IGF-1 level too much." And think about that for a second. There's other drugs on the market that have been licensed and approved that also raise IGF-1. They're called growth hormone.
Right.
And so the fact they wouldn't approve something that works further upstream because it's increasing IGF-1 is just so nonsensical to me. The fact that these people are even on the committee to potentially approve a drug, it's laughable and sad at the same time. So Europe doesn't have access to that medication. Of course, if we did, it'd be just as expensive as in the US, or maybe somewhat subsidized. But again, the logic, the mindset of some of these people in Europe, and they were probably from the UK on that committee, because that's sometimes what you get in the UK, is this natty state, computer says no model. Actually, I think the people that did say that were representatives from the UK within the EU, European Medicines Agency. But that's sad, right? So yeah, there is a thought in long-term living, jack up IGF-1 too high, not ideal, but there is a sweet spot. I don't know if you follow, where, if your levels are too low, longevity isn't good either. So I think for men, somewhere just, you don't want to be too far north of like 51, 52, 53 nanomolars per liter. Because then you have...
Balance.
What's that?
Just like balance, just like your name, balance my hormones, it's balance, right?
Exactly. So I thought we'd talk about that, because we always talk about testosterone a lot. I know we pivoted from, naturally boosting your HPTA axis. But I thought it's a nice segue to both medications, the N-clomiphene and the Egrifta version in the UK or in Europe. Don't get approved because silly minds of the regulators, but at the same time, reaching a balance. Everyone's talking about estrogen management, not doing it. I guess sometimes so tired of talking about it. And I've spoken to other clinicians. I know in the bodybuilding world, and I'm sure you've come across this when you were coaching or training or even on your podcasts. I think they're two different issues, right? Whether or not you manage estrogen, but there's so many differing opinions out there. We take a balanced approach at BMH. But before we talk about that, I have to remind people about at BMH, we can do various tests, including estradiol and highly sensitive LC mass spec estradiol. So if people are interested in watching and they're based in the UK and Europe, just contact us above and click the link for Balance by Hormones and we can do blood tests for you. All right, we'll keep going. I had to do that. My videographer said I have to do that. My marketing guy said I have to do that. Something new he wanted to try. You'll edit that out.
Hey,
so anyway,
you got good people working for you because they know what you need to do.
Yeah, I'm terrible at this on my own. But no, anyway, getting back to this, I think since it must have been 2018. This wasn't really an issue prior to that. 2018, there's a bit of noise out there about do you do anything to manage your estrogen? And my personal take on it partly was honesty from some doctors that they've seen it go too far, where people have reduced their estradiol. You've had really large windmill type clinics in the USA that were just giving everyone the same old protocol. Everyone got the same testosterone, an estrogen blocker of some kind. But then there were some other doctors that were very careful and doing just teeny micro doses of that. And they got demonized by other doctors who it was almost politicized. It was awful. And what had happened in there. And I don't know what the hell happened in 2018, but something very, really bizarre happened. And so I think now we've reached the point that ideally the less medications that you need, the better. But there are always outliers, even the ones that sound almost evangelical. When you sit down and talk to them, they'll say, yeah, I've got some patients that nothing else works for them. We have to do a little bit of mild management, for the least amount of time possible, but in general, they will bang on about the old, what they call windmill clinics in the USA that were just doing it automatically. So I don't know what your thoughts are. I mean, again, we're all about, a balanced approach, and you have to look at the individual patient, and the ideal is that you don't need to have extra medication, but I don't know if your thoughts on that.
So when I first started like my steroid coaching and teaching, I was very pro aromatase inhibitor. And I quickly realized that I was parroting information. I wasn't taking my due diligence into understanding and studying them and seeing short and long-term ramifications of use. And realistically understanding that it takes a pretty high level of estrogen of concern for a man, where they show a scale, like we know, oftentimes their scales are misconstrued.
Yeah.
What is healthy is not really in range, or it's so wide of a gap. Look, if you have the need for estrogen control, you're probably doing something that you shouldn't be doing, like D-ball or one of these hardcore steroids. Now, we know testosterone converts to estrogen when you take it. So if you're taking exogenous testosterone, it converts to estrogen. But if you're taking a proper TRT dose, the chances of you needing estrogen control, I would say out of 100%, or maybe 5. Maybe. It's very, very rare that somebody would. Now, if they do, then that would trigger me to go, maybe we need to lower the dose of their testosterone. And if that doesn't work, okay, they're just severely estrogen prone. And you know this too. A lot of times when you have an elevated body fat, you have a higher rate of estrogen conversion. Some people are just kind of born that way. I'm one of those lucky people that, I was born with gynecomastia, normally walk with a little bit higher estrogen.
Okay.
But there's certain supplements you can take, like DIM or other things that can help with that I would look at first. But generally speaking, everybody gets prescribed anastrozole, HCG, and the testosterone with a lot of these places. I had a place that I went to that sent me that, and I said, well, what the hell are you giving me this for? I'm not using this. I don't need this. I'm not touching it. I do not think it's a good idea unless it's a severe condition. I think that we start accumulating the amount of drugs we use, and that's when we get these, we start to wonder, well, how is this happening? How is that happening? Well, look at the list of things that you're taking and that you're putting on, because you're like robbing Peter to pay Paul. So this thing's going to do one thing for you, but it's going to cause 20 other problems. So let's take this to fix that. But then that's causing a bunch of problems.
Yeah. No, yeah, I know. It's less is always more when it comes to that, because what you'll have, and it depends on the medication, that you kind of chase your tail a bit. And but there are outliers. So we got to say that, because I think in this debate, the way it's framed, it could cause a bit of anxiety for some patients listening, thinking that, well, I've tried lowering my dose, I've got a low body fat, but they might have, and we have seen some people that even sent us genetic reports that they make more aromatase than the average person. And for some of them, they're the exception, but I think sometimes the pendulum swings too far, and this stuff becomes a bit politicized, and then you add in social media, and then people want to stake out a name for themselves, and say, absolutely not, never, ever. Or the other ones are saying, well, in the right situation. So it's been really interesting. I hate to keep bringing it up, but hey, we're a social media channel as well. And if you don't say something a little bit on edge, then no one watches you, I guess. But that's not why we're doing this necessarily. It's because it's a topic that continuously comes up. And, yeah, I think every case is different. I mean, also there's the metabolites further down from estradiol itself isn't bad. There may be some other metabolites that some people will use other tools like calcium deglucarate or even the DIM. I think we just don't know. But the easiest, simplest route is, not having to add too many other things to the protocol when you can. But if all else fails, I don't think the patient should be demonized or their doctor if in that selective case, it may bring some help. But low estrogen's not fun either. And if you drop that too low, then you've got no libido and you feel miserable. And it just, again, it's not ideal. But it's an interesting topic nonetheless. And you've dealt with a lot of people and you've seen this go on for a while now, right? This debate.
Oh man, have I? And I've been involved in it forever. And I have seen, I don't know, man. It's so countless on the arguments I've seen and how polarizing that it becomes.
Why though? Why is it so polarizing? It's just, it's a tool for some people. Yeah.
Because people, this is what they do. And I just had this conversation on a podcast last night, is because when people have something happen to them, they correlate that to everybody. Yeah. So if something works for you, then that's just the end all be all for everybody else. Or if you had a bad experience, that is also the end all be all for everybody else. And nobody ever wants to be wrong. Nobody ever wants to admit, like I just did to you, that I made mistakes early on and corrected, because everybody just always wants to be right. And that's not how we progress, and that's not how we make any sort of ground on improving things. I am the first dude in the room to tell you when I was wrong or said something that just was incorrect. Because if you can't be accountable, you cannot make progress. You just cannot do it. And if you cannot listen to other opinions and realize that some people have points that you should at least consider, then how do we make progress? We just don't. We just never do. So you have to be willing to do that, and you have to be able to look at things from multiple angles and also admit, okay, maybe I was wrong, or maybe I'm missing something. And when you do that, the polarizing stuff stops, because nothing should be polarizing.
No, it shouldn't, especially when it comes to science and medicine. And it should, all tools should be available, and ideally the least that you need, but everyone is individual. Which brings me to another interesting topic. Around that same time was the whole rise of microdosing of testosterone. I mean, did you see this a lot in the bodybuilding community, the microdosing, or do you think the genuine need came out of it, as some people can't always tolerate a large bolus dose? But on the flip side, I also see, even with small doses or short-acting esters, or even the longer-acting esters like the cypionate, every day even when you do a small dose, I have seen it build up. It does build up over time. And sometimes you can still see a creeping in of hematocrit and hemoglobin. I don't know if you ever had a problem with that personally. But it's kind of quite an interesting thing, because these are the big topics in TRT in general. Is, okay, is my hematocrit going to go up? Is my blood going to get too thick? And, is my estradiol going to go up? And am I going to get, bitch tits gynecomastia? And, these are always the questions people ask. And, and sometimes even for myself, I've got sleep apnea. Hemoglobin goes up. Sometimes the CPAP machine doesn't always keep it in check. Sometimes I haven't hydrated enough before the test. Even me, I'm doing microdosing. I do daily 20 milligrams of testosterone propionate, because over here they come preservative free. So there's no preservative, just olive oil, and a bit of ethyl oleate and the testosterone propionate in a 25 milligram ampule. So it's a fresh one every day. But anyway, even doing that, my levels, they can get between 30 and 40 nanomoles per liter on, it's probably closer to 1,000, 1,200, the next day when I go to retest. So I like to keep it closer to 900 or 1,000 if I can. But initially that was the way, but then over time you see a build up from even that. So I don't know what your thoughts are on microdosing and the wave that it's, and who defines what microdosing is? Is it daily, every other day, twice a week?
Yeah, what is it? Okay, so here's one for you. You've heard of Kaisertrex, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just started taking that. I mean, that's the daily, and that's very promising. Is that microdosing? I mean, do you look at it that way because it's in a capsule? Everybody's going to have a different opinion on what a microdose is. It's
that's
like
true.
GLP-1s. What do you consider a microdose or a normal dose? Because it's so all over the place. I consider what you're doing more on the microdosing side, but once again, that might be tailored to you.
Yeah.
I think this. In fact, I know this is there's far more than one way to do things. Are there preferential ways that may be a little bit more effective for some? Sure, absolutely. But does that mean that that's the best way for everybody else? No. And that's one of the things that's hard when you're a teacher of anything, is you have to be willing to say to people, there's multiple ways to do things, not just your stubborn way of doing it. And you may just say, this is my preferred way, but here's some other ways to go about it that I've seen work well, and I think that you get a better engagement of listeners who trust you more when you're willing to do that. And it's the honest truth. Otherwise, you look like a stubborn 65-year-old coach that gets fired because he never makes changes to adapt to the way things are today. You know what I mean?
Said. Yeah, that's true. So if you enjoy content like this, please hit the like button, subscribe, and the notifications so when new videos come out that you can be part of our community. And do leave comments. We'd love to hear what you have to say, and we respond to comments that you have. Until next time, to your health, to your wellness, and to your libido.